Um, let's open with a word of prayer and then let's do check in with each other and we'll get into class this evening. Let's pray. Holy God, whether we have been hurried or we've had a nice chill day or anything in between, we now steady our hearts and our minds. We come before you. I would invite everybody to take a couple deep breaths. As you let it out, just know we're in the presence of a loving God. Maybe take a couple more. Take a moment to check in with yourself a little bit. How are you right now? How's your experience of the day or the week been? Just pause to reflect back on what's been. Take a moment to think about the things that were highlight moments, good moments. Take a moment to consider things that were maybe challenges. And then maybe anything that was a surprise, good or bad, just something you didn't see coming. Maybe with regard to the class, or it could just been your week. God, we come before you with the fullness of our lives, the highs, lows, the unexpected. We give you thanks because we know that you can be at work in all of these. You are at work in all of these. So give us awareness and mindfulness to catch glimpses of you at work, to be responsive and to be grateful. And let's be present with one another, O Lord, as we take time to learn from each other from this last week's lessons. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Yeah.
All right. I was listening for a minute. I thought my sister was coming over through the back door and trying to be quiet, but she's not here yet. In line with our prayer, I want to take a few minutes. And really, this will be a lot. Our class, in many ways, is mainly a touch base with one another on how the readings, how the daily activities went for you, to learn from each other, to go back if we have questions about anything that we ran into and went, I don't know about that, to be able to ponder those things together. And in full transparency, I'm doing this a little differently. While I'm reading through all the material, I had taken on a Lenten discipline where I'm doing something specific for an hour at the front end of the day every day around prayer. So I'm more kind of invested in that and then hitting this in a light fashion. But I've done it 3 times now. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And I'm still, even going through this week, I went, oh, yeah, okay, I see that now. But if we could, let's take a minute, and I do want to check in on what your experience was out of the exercises or the readings. And the easy and kind of a fun way to get at that, I want to do something that our family does when we're on vacations together. And I think I learned that we used to do this thing in Boy Scouts that we called thorns, roses, and buds. We're going to do something different, but thorns, roses, and buds were the roses were that was the unexpected thing that happened today that was really good, right? The highlight of the day. The thorn was something that they didn't like that day. We're all sitting around the campfire after hiking all day. And then a bud was something you're looking forward to the next day. Well, I learned a variation on that on my family vacation last year when we went to Ireland and Scotland. And my son and his girlfriend do what they call highs, lows, and buffaloes. And the buffalo is the weird thing you didn't see coming. Like what was something that caught your attention? Like where that I didn't expect that. Um, and I can start for me. Um, my most meaningful moment in prayer this last week was what I'm doing. First off, I should back up and tell you what I'm doing. I'm getting up early for me. I'm getting up at 5:30. I've never been a morning person, and I spend the first 30 minutes of the day just went, lost me there, right? Yeah, I'm historically have had no sleep pattern, but when I have one, it's late at night. And I'm getting up at 5:30. I do 30 minutes of prayer, and then I do 30 minutes of writing kind of out of that. I'll take a few minutes to write maybe an insight I've had from how my experience was that morning, but I'm really more writing what I feel led to write. Like I'm working on blog post about prayer right now. And so I got to tell you, it took me 10 days before I really kind of settled into that. I mean, to where I felt like I wasn't just fighting to do the prayer time, like I was, how am I going to sit here for 30 minutes kind of thing, and how much time do I have left? Oh, 27 minutes, wasn't quite that bad. I was surprised at how off center I was. I really was surprised. And so it took me about 10 days. Um, so if I will say, if you're struggling to find a rhythm to doing this, don't be surprised by that. That's not unusual. Not that I was doing specifically this. Um, but this week is when finally, well, it was last week, at the end of last week, I started to settle into the discipline I was trying. And then um, Tuesday, Tuesday or Monday, it was Monday. Monday, I was just so centered and grounded through the whole practice. It really felt lovely. And I write for 30 minutes. Well, I ended up writing for like an hour and a half because I was just in a flow. I started writing. It's like, I'm on it. I'm just going, let's just enjoy this. My hard moment was my wife messed it all up. Here's what I mean. So I have a whole ritual to it where I go upstairs. And Susan gets up early all the time. She's usually awake or getting up shortly after that, almost always. But she just stays in her room or goes to the gym. So I don't even see her until all this is done. But I go upstairs, I light a little candle. I have kind of a ritual to it. There's a couple kind of things I say. I light a candle. I go over, I have this big comfy chair I sit down in, and I go into 30 minutes of prayer. Well, I get up and I go walking down the hall, and I can see all the lights are on upstairs. And she's gone upstairs to work. I was like, so much for my big cushy chair. So it's funny how a little thing can mess with your routine. And I
Yeah,
just,
Adam blamed Eve too, didn't
yeah. So I pivoted nicely though. I I decided I'd been feeling, because the weather had been pretty warm earlier in the week. I was like, it'd be nice to go outside in that pre-dawn, that pre-dawn hush, and you start to hear the birds coming alive. And so I thought, oh, that'll be great. And I went out and I walked out my backyard, and it's that still dark, and the wind is about 30 miles an hour. I went and sat in that and tried to pray sitting in that little bench with the wind just. And I was like, you know what? This is good though. I'm gonna sit here and see if I can get centered. Well, I get smacked around by nature, you know, and I did. It was actually, it was a good thing, but, oh man, that was a struggle moment this week in prayer. But it was good. Ultimately, it was really good, right? The struggles where we grow a lot of times. Um, and I don't know what unexpected when I went through the material and I just seeing things that I hadn't seen before. But in my writing that I was where I was writing about prayer, um, I had talked about how when I don't know how you guys learned to pray, but I was kind of in and out. I had a sort of a spotty uh, history in the church as a kid. I really wasn't in the church much as a kid. So I really, for all practical purposes, I didn't start going to high school. And nobody in my house prayed. We didn't ever say thanks at meals. I didn't do bedtime prayers as a kid, you know, parents tucking me in or something. Um, and so when I started going to church, like I didn't really know what I was supposed to do to pray. I just listened and watched what other people did, and I kind of tried to do that, you know, but nobody actually taught me how to pray. And also, and nobody had ever said like how much benefit and value there was to having some kind of prayer time. And I never saw that modeled in my home. Um, so I just kind of reached for prayer as a tool when I needed it, you know, where I was didn't know what to do other than say, "Hey God, it's me. I've got a problem," or periodically say thanks about something. But I had no practice of prayer. And I was writing about that, and then there was one paragraph. It was on day two that just leapt out at me because I he put beautiful words to what was definitely my experience, and that is, he said, "There's a difference between the tendency to pray and the practice of prayer. We have the tendency to pray, the reflexive cry out in the face of pain or trouble, the spontaneous shout of joy in the presence of beauty, accomplishment, and fulfillment. We give expression to it sporadically according to the moods and circumstances of our life." And I was like, man, that was my world of prayer. Um, until many years ago when I was in a youth ministry leadership position and we were all asked to take on a spiritual discipline for a couple months and share our experience. And that was the first time I ever had any kind of discipline. But I just read that and it smacked me between the eyes because I suspect that's a very, very, very common story in reality. It was mine. I'd never had anybody say, hey, like creating a discipline of prayer in your life or having a practice, like a time you do it, is really beneficial. So I've been rambling a lot. That's probably partially because I was so wound up when I came through the door. But let me push pause on me and you all can either ask questions or reflect something back. Or if someone wants to jump in, I would love to hear what were kind of your highs, lows, and buffaloes. Was there anything that was a high, you know, like a high moment in prayer or awareness or something you learned, uh, and so on. So I'll push pause there for a minute. Wet my whistle.
I think that this will be my third time to do this book. And this morning I had time to go back and reread all my notes from the luxury of rereading my notes all the way through for the first time and the second time. And I just feel like our human frailties are the tendency is to only approach God when we're in a panic
Mhm.
or a bad spot. And long time ago, I had a preacher tell us that took 6 weeks to develop a good habit. And so that practice of praying, if you do it every day for 6 weeks, then it becomes part of your day.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah, and that's really how this becomes living prayer, right? When it becomes a normative it's integrated into your life. It's part of who you are. I pray now. I'm a praying person. Um, and yeah, I I think that I wonder where he got that interval. There's all kinds of stats around habits, and I think a lot depends on the intensity and the extent of what in the world you're trying to develop as a habit, you know. Um, but to really incorporate something into your life, man, that takes some dirt time, you know. Um,
Well, his approach was attending church. He said if you can make yourself attend church 6 weeks in a row, then it all of a sudden it'll get easier. It'll just be easier to go to church.
mhm. Your discipline of doing it creates a momentum where it's almost reflexive, right?
Right. So 6 weeks of Lent is a good time to develop a good practice.
Thought about it that way. All right. Other things people got this week that either grabbed them or they had questions about. And it's open.
Sherry's nudging Jerry.
I am.
She wants him to talk.
Well, I was looking at my notes here, and I was saved, came to God when I was 48 years old, and like Pastor there, I wasn't I didn't go to church when I was a boy. I wasn't made to go, and we didn't have prayer at the table. We didn't. I was never, told to pray at night or anything. But
Right.
then after I started reading the Bible and learning about prayer, I had a formula I did for a long time. Certain times of the day I'd pray and have a list of people to pray for and things to pray for. And then I read a scripture that said, pray without ceasing.
Mm.
And as I read that, I started thinking about that. So that's pretty much where I'm at and where I've been for several years. I pray all day as I go along for a lot of time, mostly for forgiveness, but for for people, I see something person on the street I feel like needs prayer, or even at a truck stops or something. I've prayed for people, but pray without ceasing is my norm now.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. That's good.
But very personally, and it's private for him. I don't know he's doing that.
Yeah.
It's his. It's
Yeah.
what he does.
Yeah.
And when I hear him say things like he just said, I mean, I know that's who he is, but nobody else would know that. And it's not important to him that anybody else does know
Not
it.
at all.
So that's interesting to me because I don't get that. I do not get that.
Yeah. Wait, say a little bit more about that. What do you mean by I don't get that? You don't get
That's not well, I guess I can give my own story about that. I did grow up in the church, and I was taught to say my nighttime prayers when I was a little child, and up until I was probably my teens, and I played the piano in the junior choir, and prayed in church and prayed in Sunday school, but it just never really connected for me. It just never. It's like, okay, let's pray. Okay, words. And I mean, I felt it. I mean, it was like, this is a wonderful thing. There's this God who cares about us, but it didn't ever really feel personal to me. And and I'm still that way. I'm still and it's not a bad feeling for me. It's not a bad feeling at all. And one thing, I went on a soul journey last year. It was a year of learning to meditate and learning to give thanks, and it's almost prayer, because every day in my soul journey, I was taught to give thanks
Mm-hmm.
for one thing every day, to bless another person, to pray for them, to send them good thoughts every day, and to be grateful um, for, I can't remember what the other one was, but anyway, I did, and that to me felt like prayer.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that was almost tangible. It was from me out to the universe, to those people, to things in my life. And I felt good about that. I still feel good about that. It's almost, I, is it prayer? Is it prayer?
It sounds,
So,
it sounds very prayerful for sure.
yeah, well, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But there's no really central figure like God. And I'm not saying that God doesn't exist to me. I'm just saying that I think there's a whole big sphere out there that includes God. Um, and I just can't seem to make a personal connection to that one spiritual person, or that. And again, I've been that. I was 10 years old in Sunday school. I still remember this. I've told Jerry this story. And my Sunday school teacher was Margaret Ogilvy and her son Jock. And I grew up together. And I made her cry because we're in Sunday school class and she's telling us all these things about, oh, I think it was the Gospels. She was talking about one of the, and I said, well, how do you know that person wrote that? How do you know that? She said, Sherry, you just have to believe. And I'm like, well, I just, and I wasn't being
Oh,
ornery.
yeah. You earnestly wanted to know, like, why
Exactly.
do you believe that to be true? Yeah,
Yeah, I was not being
exactly.
contrary.
Yeah.
Just,
But she didn't have
and,
an answer, so it was,
and it frustrated her.
yeah.
So, and of course, that made me feel terrible. It's
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, why is Mrs. Ogilvy crying? Because I'm asking questions in class.
Did,
So,
it sounds like something this past year for you was a meaningful shift in terms of, I felt a very different, when you talked about when you were younger and you were praying, you said it was words, 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 you
yeah,
know. And then when you shifted and you were talking about this last year, while you didn't use this word, it sounded like that came from a much more heartfelt or centered place.
yes,
Like
I
you were,
felt it.
I think you were coming from a different place. It sounds like early in your faith journey, it was kind of almost a mental exercise to pray.
Exactly.
And this sounds more like you were really voicing things deeply that earnestly meant something to you,
Really,
you know.
really
And
soul searching.
yeah, that makes a big difference. Um, Jerry, it was interesting. I'm going to circle back. And what was there was something you said that was really important about. Oh, I know what it was. I think Jerry, when you were talking about your norm now is to pray without ceasing, and then Sherry, you were saying like, I know he does that and that's who he is, but nobody else would know that. You don't see that, you know. I think that's a I think that's a really good living expression of what Jesus talks about in Matthew. It's either the tail end of 5 or in Matthew 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, when he tells us that we should go into our prayer closet. I recently preached on this. Your prayer closet can be a physical closet. I've literally in several houses had a physical closet in the house that I took and made a prayer space.
I've had that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's super meaningful and helpful, actually. Like, I highly encourage you to do that if you have some space to do it. But what struck me recently, I just preached on this not too long ago, that passage, and what struck me is that a closet does not have to be a geographical.
Right.
Our closet can be right in here. Because Jesus says two things in Matthew that sound almost contrary. In the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, early on in chapter 5, he says, "Let your light shine before men." Who'd put it under a basket? No, that whole "let your light shine" story we all, kids grow up singing.
Mhm.
This little light of mine, the passage is based off that passage. But what it says is, "Let your light shine before men so that people seeing your good works will glorify God." So it has to do with how you're letting your light shine, and are you shining it in somebody's face, or are you illuminating God with it, right? And that can sound, when you on the surface, that can sound almost contrary. Let your light shine, do your works before people. To then, with not even a chapter later, and you got to remember, this is all in the same talk. He's standing there, and this is a couple minutes later at best. He's saying, "Now, when you pray, go in your closet." But what he's warning people against is making sure that you're not doing it before people and getting a reward for that. That your motivation is not, standing before
Right.
doing that. And so, to me, what I hear when I listen to you talk about praying without ceasing, and Sherry saying, "I would never know he's doing that," or nobody else would, like I know. I think that's a really great expression of what Jesus is saying when he says, go into your prayer closet. It does not have to be physical. We have a whole internal world going on all the time, right?
Right.
I'm glad everybody can't see that, but
Lion monkeys.
yeah, that's right. But the cool thing about that is we truly can retreat into our prayer closet, even in the most chaotic of situations, and be a pool of God's peace in the middle of chaos for other
Mhm.
people. I told you that story about, I think I told you a story about I met that monk at a monastery years ago on this prayer retreat. And we spent hours a day praying. And I came back and I was so blissed out. I mean, I was just walking around like, oh, the world's beautiful, everything's perfect. Like I was in this just blissful state after, like I was the peace that surpasses all understanding. I was just so chill about everything after spending hours a day in prayer. And I remember at that time I worked in a hotel, and I was a van driver. And I came in, it was my first shift after coming off this retreat. And I came in at a shift change at around 5:30 in the afternoon. And it was really crazy because like I was coming in and the other van driver was getting off, and I needed to get to the airport immediately because we were running late to pick these people up. This flight crew to come in early. It was just like, And I remember walking in and all these people were buzzing around. I'm all like, okay. and I go and get the van and I pick the crew up and I'm talking to this. It ends up I just have this one woman in the car with me, this flight attendant. And I'm talking to her, and we get to we're just chit chatting the usual. Where'd you fly in from? But we got to the hotel and she goes, "I've just got to ask, like, you've got the most peaceful presence. She goes,
Yeah.
what is that? Like she just was like, she didn't know what to do with that. It was palpable. Uh,
That's the light that shines.
yeah, yeah. And I didn't say a word about prayer. I didn't say a word about God. I didn't say a word about, I mean, we're chit chatting about her checking in and whatnot, but the light of God was just tangible
Right.
for her.
Right.
And it came out of me spending time in prayer, at an intense level.
Hmm.
So, well, with Chuck and June, I'm going to switch over to you for a minute. Um, what came? Um, what was your week like? You got some highs, lows, or buffaloes for us?
Well, first, let me say that I apologize, but we're still having this pause here.
Oh, I hadn't caught it, so I'm sorry.
That's why maybe if I'm quiet, you won't. But
Okay.
yeah, we're kind of still recuperating from having company for a little over a week.
Oh boy.
Getting back into sync with everything. But I think Chuck's had a little more time to read than I had. You could take over there.
You're talking about highs and lows of the week.
Yeah, it can either, if you had something specific out of this that was a high or low or something you learned. But I'll tell you what, even hearing some of the highs and lows from your week, sometimes we find that's where God's in the midst of things. So feel free if you have a high or low of the week or just an experience where it was kind of a God moment for you. It could be a simple gratitude. A lot of this is learning to be aware and recognize where God's kind of showing up or a synchronicity is happening, where things come together and you go, well, wait a minute, how'd that happen? I think that's where we see God in the mix a lot of times. But anything comes to mind in particular?
Well, I'm not sure if it's what you want, but um, this book is different than most books that I've read on prayer, very different. And I never had time to pray for myself. I was always involved in intercessory prayer, different things for other people, and praying for other people, and not really thinking per se about God coming, because I feel like whenever I was involved in something that involved other people, God would come to me in preparation to do something. Okay. And I'm like the Benix didn't walk into a church until I was 20 years old. Well, I was baptized as a kid when I was very young, but never attended church. And giving thanks wasn't a part of our meals. And all of the same type of stuff that's been said before. And so as I moved down on my own, a certain situation came about where I went to church. And it was through going to church that I began to realize that, hey, there's something special going on.
Hmm.
And, but ever since I was 20 years old, more like 22, I'm always in a position of leadership And I don't know, it just seemed every time I got involved with anything, it propelled into leadership responsibilities. And I don't want to tell my whole life story, but at any rate, it wasn't until I hit that last year that leadership kind of came to an end. And so it's been a long number of years. And I've been in a lot of different places and experienced a lot of beautiful things that's happening in the lives of people through those years. So, and what I'm doing. Well, right now I'm in a pretty relaxed position in life because I'm not doing anything. First time in years and years. And yet this class was made available and June and I decided to attend it because I never quit reading. And I said, well, maybe this is something new. Well, it is something new. And especially in the first couple of chapters of this book, of a lot of concentration on the individual or myself seeking after God and wanting Him to come in to my life in a visible way. And I've never done that. And so I don't know if that's, if I have the right interpretation of what the book teaches or not. I don't know. But I feel like that there's a lot to be had even after all these years. In coming to a relationship with God.
Yeah,
Lot to learn.
go ahead. Were you gonna say something, June?
I just said there's always a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That really, I gotta say, Chuck, that really struck me reading through this first chapter again. And I don't know if it was my prayer drive and how I read it or vice versa a little bit. When I say that, what I mean is, there's more emphasis in this first chapter than I recalled around really that personal connection and communion. And I have found this while I'm doing this morning practice. One of the things that shifted for me, and I think it was around that 11-day mark, the 12-day mark, was making sure that my intention was very much about connection and relating with God. Just being sure that that was my intention instead of pulling off prayer for the sake of prayer. You know, I don't know if that makes sense, but there's, we can, I'll never forget, it's hung with me for years and years. There's a book by a rabbi named Abraham Heschel. Trying to think of his book. I can't think of the name of the book. I'll have to dig around. But anyways, it was a book on prayer. And he made this statement, the object of prayer is not prayer, but God. And that really slowed me down. Like that you know, I mean, think about our relationships. When you're communicating with people face to face, ideally, you know, your intention is to create and hold some kind of connection with that person. It's not about hearing yourself speak or making sure you said something. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to wrap my head and my heart around that distinction. And right now, the best I can do is just make sure my intention is really around the connection and not just doing what I would call checklist praying. Well, I got my prayer in today, you know, like making prayer an end in itself of, did you pray today? I prayed today. Well, okay, that's great. What did that mean? Did you just rattle something off? You know, I guess it goes a little bit back to, I'm feeling all this out myself. That distinction, Sherry, between words, and sharing things that really matter to you, and really coming at that authenticity. There was actually a line that I underlined from this last week that I think that's why it grabbed my attention, and this was on during the day exercise for day 4. And it simply had a line that said, find a few quiet minutes at different times during this day and simply talk to God about what's important to you today. And I underline that, about what's important to you today. And the note I made was, get real with God and be vulnerable. You know, what is the thing in your heart you're most trying to give voice to? I think that's so critical for prayer to get to a place of depth and any sense of connection. You know, the people we have connection with are the ones we say the most important things to. You know, the guy counter at the store that I say thank you to when we talk about the weather, there's not a lot of connection there.
The thing about personal relationship with God is He already knows your thoughts. He knows all about you. It's not like talking to someone else where you hide things. Completely open with God. Talk to Him. I talk to Him as I would be talking to you, but certainly I'm in awe of His presence. And when I know when I'm really open with Him, I can feel His presence. And that's when you know that you're connected. And because there's nothing I can say to Him that He don't already know, but He wants us to voice our feelings, our deepest feelings. And I've had some good conversations with Him about over mine. But I see it as a personal relationship with someone who already knows me. He made me, so
So if you hide things,
you can't.
you're only hiding things from yourself, right? You're just
right,
fooling yourself.
right.
Self-deception.
Yeah,
Nothing is hidden from the sight of God.
that's right.
It's in the
Nothing.
Bible.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I was thinking about Sherry when she was saying as a kid, the adults are talking and she's like, it's Charlie Brown when the teacher's talking and all he hears is wah, 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 wah. And
It's true.
you are not alone. I mean, there are so many people that can't hear it. They don't have the correct translation.
Hmm.
It's
Well,
like
a translation.
Right.
I mean, it's, I don't know about the word correct. I mean, there's just no way to comprehend.
correct. That God is beyond our understanding, our human understanding. And I think anytime we go outside and we see a beautiful rosebud or a butterfly come by and we go, oh, isn't that great? that's praise to God because He's the creator. And anytime we have my mother always said, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And the reason she said that was at the age of 14, she had tuberculosis.
Oh my goodness.
And everybody in her hospital dorm, except mother and her best friend, Rose, died.
Oh my goodness.
Teenagers. And as a teenager, she held people's hands as they were dying. I mean, she had TB, they had TB, and they needed someone to sit with them. So she would read from her Bible and she would hold their hand.
Mm.
And mother grew up Presbyterian. And when she married my dad, we lived way off in the countryside in Missouri. And the only church to go to was the little country Church of Christ. And my mother just said, it doesn't matter if you're Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, whatever. You go to church on Sunday somewhere and be grateful.
Mm. Mm.
And she said, thank you every day. And she lived to be 90.
Wow.
That's a lot of days of gratitude. Gary, when you said there's times where when you really open up, you feel God's presence.
Oh, yeah.
If you tried to describe that, how would you describe that? I know that's like I find people experience God in varied and wondrous ways. I'm curious when you say that, what that kind of, how would you describe that?
It's like complete peace comes over you and surrounds you. It's hard to explain, but it's a presence that you know that it's not a worldly presence around you. It's a heavenly presence. And I find that a lot of times in nature, in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
I like to hike and get out in nature and sit on a log and talk to the Lord. Or in my room, but and it's just a peace that I can't explain.
No, I get what you're saying. I was curious what words you'd put to it, because when I have had what I would say moments in time, the time when I feel like I'm really connected to God, it's very, very hard to put words into. Also, when I have had thoughts, or frequently what happens for me is when I have moments that are discerning moments, when I have something where I just have no doubt in my mind it's God trying to get my attention, I'm very visual. I'll have things, picture somebody in my head, or a memory come up, or dreams. I've had some really profound dreams, and it's hard to put words to, but I can tell people it is qualitatively different. Like, that's all I can say. Those thoughts are qualitatively different. And that doesn't do anybody any good for me to say that, but I said it's like the difference between, how many of us we wake up in the middle of the night and we think we heard something, and we listen really closely, like, did you hear something? I think I heard something. And you sit there and you listen and never hear, and you kind of dismiss it. There's times you wake up and you're like, I heard something. Like, the difference between those experiences is, night and day, qualitatively. Like, you don't know what you heard, you're like in those experiences, but the clarity of whether you did or did not hear something is night and day different. Like, there's no question in one. And to me, it's that same sense of absolute surety, that like, there's not a, now I have a lot of times too, when I pray and I'm like, man, is this God? We'll find out. I think this is what I'm called to do right now. There's a whole lot of that. one thing I wrote down, and I don't know how well this bears out with prayer. But in our last day's lesson today, it was saying it was the last paragraph before sharing together, and I'm just going to read it. This was on day 7 of week 1. It's last paragraph where, as the group comes to a place where, oh, hang on, I'm gonna scoot down a little bit. Oh, about midway through the paragraph, it's saying that, be willing to share both the good and the bad of how prayer goes for you. It's not always, rainbows and butterflies. I don't use those words, that's me. But building a life of prayer involves struggle and change. We may not always feel God's presence. Therefore, praying is not dependent upon feeling. Don't be afraid to tell about your dry periods, your valleys, your plateaus, as well as your mountains. And when I read that, what it reminded me of recently, I was reading this article by an athlete, and she had a terrible practice. Her coach was like, how is your training today? It's like, oh, it's terrible. Everything was an effort. She's kind of riffing on how bad it was. And he was an Olympic athlete who had become a coach. And he had what he called the rule of thirds. And he said, if your training is going about right, at the level you need to be training, about a third of the time, it will be miserable. And you'll feel like you had a really bad practice. About a third of the time, you'll feel like, man, you crushed it. Today was a great day. That was a wonderful workout. And then about a third of the day, it's just unremarkable. You're just putting in the time. And I think there can be some truth to that around really anything we're learning and growing in. But for me, I think with prayer, I have a bell curve of experience, not so much thirds, but it's more like this, where I have moments where it's just like that first 6 or 7 days of that new discipline. Oh my goodness. I was just really struggling. And then I've had many a moment where God's been undeniably real. I've heard or seen or read something that I knew was God tapping me on the shoulder, needing my attention to obey something, to do something, to serve in some way. But a whole lot of times, my prayer is kind of just showing up and hanging with God, and I can't really tell you one way or the other on the other side. But what I can tell you is that when I do this, no matter what the experience is like of the prayer time, the quality of my life is very different outside of that prayer time. When I begin to neglect this, that's when I find that I lose peace in a lot of other pockets in my life, and that's where we have to remember. I think what he's saying, he actually, when I read that section a moment ago, when he talked about feeling prayer, he had italicized. He said, we may not always feel God's presence, and he italicized feel. We don't necessarily see or know the growth as we're working out per se. It comes because of that, but we see the fruit of it outside of the experience of it. The athlete doesn't see the fruit of the training till they're finally in the game or on the field. The training's just training. They might have wins or things along the way. They're like, wow, I'm doing better. But it's not until they're really out in the game and they go, oh, I played much better this week. Like staying an extra 30 minutes after shooting hoops really paid off, I'll pause there and see what kind of responses you have. And like I said, I want this class to be between an hour to, I allowed up to an hour and a half. Part of that was because I wanted to allow for breakout session times. We have a small enough class that we don't have to do that. So let me pause here and see what questions people have, or, you might have a question about what somebody shared, observations. I'll pause and give you a moment to see what we need to attend to before we get out of here today.
I'm just continuing to process the information. We got up every day and did our lesson first thing off the bat, and usually that led to some conversation between us. So that was a good thing, that reflection. And again, I'm just processing and paying at this point a lot of attention to my feelings, what I feel when I read certain things, certain passages, certain ideas, and paying attention to what's easy for me to answer. And some of the questions are like, no, I don't want to answer that.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, seriously, yeah. No, I need to think about this some more. I don't want to think about it.
I mean, like you need my permission to do this, but I was going to say, that's okay. Be gracious with yourself.
Yeah, it's working for me, and I don't know where it's going to go, because it feels good. I like the learning. I like the self-reflection, the kind of bouncing off of ideas from the knowledge I already have about spirituality and religion. And I mean, I'm 77 years old. I'm thinking, I need to get a grip. I need to figure out what it is. I think about this and how it works. I'm not unhappy in my life, but I just feel like for instance, him, how can he have this peace and he just walks around like and totally comfortable with his faith and his and he is pretty much a rock, and I can see him living his faith, and I know other people like Jerry who do that too, and they have a countenance about them. You can almost sense that. I have some relatives who are like that as well too, and I don't know. I don't feel left out. I don't feel like.
Oh, yeah, you don't seem like it.
No, I don't feel like God doesn't love me or anything. I don't feel not included, but it just feels like a whole. I mean, beginning from the time I was a child, when, I mean, every Sunday of my life, Sunday school, church, and it just never took. I mean, seriously, that's just kind of it. It just never, but I know that stuff. I know it.
Sherry, I think you're voicing what is actually very, very common and normative as I have conversation with folks. I think you're maybe in the vast majority even. Like if we were to sit down and folks were really open about where they are on prayer, because in side conversations that I have with people that they won't voice in class, they're just like this.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, yeah. I'm not shy. I don't have a problem. Like I told Jerry.
I'm glad you're not. You hit a couple things I want to mention real quickly that I think are been kind of knocking on my door as we were talking. Two particular words. And I'm going to look in the book real quick to see one of the very first days. It was either day one or day two. He had a little 3-line something or other, like almost, I wouldn't call it a mantra, but well, yeah, it really almost is.
I think I know what he's talking about.
Let's see.
Yeah, like that.
One was on day 4. That's not the one I was looking for. I know what it was. On day one, it was really interesting. He said, right now in your own heart, make this affirmation. This was right before the during the day exercise on day one. Um, I want to learn to pray. I open my mind to you, God. Teach me to pray. I want to learn to pray. I open my mind to you, God. Teach me to pray. And I thought that was a really important, I'm really glad he started with that, because what he's getting at is what is your intention? And he's having you set a prayer intention of learning about prayer, being clear about the intention as we go into this. And, one of like I was voicing that earlier, for me, something that's different right now, my intention in other disciplines I did that a little high. Intention at other times when I've done the disciplines were learning the discipline. So it really was about just kind of making sure I did prayer, and whereas now, like for me, I have a higher intention around the connection that happens and I experience going into this of God, what I'm really seeking here is your presence. So intention's really important. What is our intention when we pray? Versus, here's another thing, what is or how are we spending? Sorry, I just realized my voice probably disappeared. How are we, what's going on with our attention? Intention and attention, very, very different things. What made me think about this was, Sherry, you were talking about being very mindful. You were very conscious about your attention, it sounds like, as you've been going through these lessons. Like, what is bubbling up for you? And that's when you said, well, no, I don't want to do that one. I'm not doing that question. Or, that's where you're being very attentive as you go through this. And that's really critical, because the things where the level of attention we can hold to what we're doing is really going to be the barometer of what we take away from it. The one thing that would be really interesting for all of us when we do hit a question, because I hit some of those questions too, and they go, oh, like you just went from preaching to meddling. You did not have to ask that, like, I can't think of one. I'm sure if I thumbed through there, I know there's some of them, because I remember early on when we were doing this and we didn't have enough books in one of the classes, and Liz wanted to photocopy my book, and I'd answered some of these questions, and I'm like, I ain't comfortable with photocopying that and putting it out to a whole class, because some of these questions were hard questions, and I tried to be honest about them, and it was not. I was like, oh man, but it's really important as you're going through this study, when you bump into, say, one of those questions, really sit with that. Like, not the question per se, but why am I uncomfortable with this?
Exactly. And that's what I'm doing, the processing of my feelings about that. It's like, why? And I usually come up with an answer.
Yeah.
I do come up with an answer.
What does that look like for you when you're doing that? Is it just sort of repeatedly trying to probe why and listening and paying attention to what's bubbling up, or what does that look like?
It's not like I'm focused or fretting or anything. I'm just kind of like going along in my day, and it's filed. Yeah. It's filed there. And, usually, and I do process information like that. I just kind of put it there and see where it ends up. Like, I know one of the questions, it was name 5 things in the last year, is something like that. One of the lessons, name 5 things in the last year that you have experienced. And it's like,
that timeline.
Yeah. And it's like, No, I've already processed a lot of that. I don't want to visit again because there were some really hard things.
Sure.
And
I had this very conversation with a friend this week. He was
Did
wondering,
you?
we hadn't talked for several months, and I had something really hard happen a couple weeks ago. And I said, "Oh man, I had a terrible week a couple weeks ago." And I said, "But I'm not going to tell you about it because I'm trying to get past rehearsing it.
Exactly.
I want to move into releasing it."
Right.
And I said, "If right now I'm sick of telling the story, I'm
Yeah.
ready to move on from the story and move from."
But I had to come to that. I hear you, but that's what I had to come to. It's like, why am I not? And it's like, because I've already done this work and I don't want to think about it again. It's probably not good for me to do that.
Mhm.
There's no benefit or advantage.
Right.
So,
That's good
but
to know.
even visiting the question, I mean, I was glad to see it. And I
Yeah.
was glad to recognize that been there, done that.
Yeah.
And so
Any other last thoughts from folks? And if not, I'm going to wrap us up here.
I was thinking about how Sherry feels about um, naming God as God, and she's taking a very educated look at things and deeply. And I think it goes back to how do you translate for yourself? What is this? And I translate God as love. And I also think that when we pray, we can't be careless. And when I have difficulty praying, I start naming my blessings, my people, and I pray for them. And I've learned through the years that do be careful how you pray. Don't pray for strength.
That's right.
Pray that God will share his strength with you.
yeah.
Pray that God will share his wisdom with others or yourself to make good choices. But don't say, give me wisdom. Oh man, that's
Yeah, I get
that's
that.
like setting the brush on fire. Or
Or
Pray
patience.
for patience. Yeah, that's what I was going to
yeah,
say.
don't pray for
You wanna
patience. No, because you'll get beat over the head with that one.
That's
really-
right.
Pick your sister up at the airport right before a class. That's what happened. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. And I just that thing about letting your light shine, you're not really letting your light shine. You are reflecting God's love
Right.
others, and that reflection causes a radiance. And your connection and your prayers are so important. People don't think they are, but truly prayer is so important. And I don't pray enough. I wish I was like Jerry, praying throughout the day, but then I have to think to myself, okay, I saw that butterfly. That's wonderful. I praise God for that butterfly. Our nature is going away rapidly, whether it's by forest fire or climate change, whatever. The world's changing rapidly, quicker than I can keep up with.
Birthing pains, Jesus called it.
What kind of pains, Jerry? What kind of pain?
Birthing pains.
Oh,
Birthing pains. Yeah.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
That was beautiful. Yeah, God's something more we apprehend than comprehend. So that's for sure. At least it's been my experience. All right, unless somebody's got a question or something, another observation we need to, before we get out of here. I would like to pray for things, people, good or bad, that y'all may feel and you would love prayer for. Are there any prayer requests right now?
I would like to just say gratitude again. That's my big word. Our oldest daughter's biopsy came back, and it was in her favor. It was good. Everything was clear for right now.
That's awesome.
Wonderful.
Good to hear. I think I would pray for peace for this nation and for the world. So much going on.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the things that prompted me to continue to start this study now, feeling very stressed about what's going on in the world. And again, Jerry's at peace, and I'm like freaking out every day. It's like, I don't know. I don't want to look at the news. I don't want to see it, but
Are you yelling? Are you yelling at the TV?
no, I don't do that. No, I do not do that.
Sometimes you just have to turn it off.
Yeah, but that doesn't really serve.
Well, you need to know what's going on.
Well, and I've always been an activist. It's like, no, we do not sit down and wait for things to happen.
My peace comes from knowing who's in control.
Yeah.
That's a good place to
It's
be.
not me.
No, it is not.
Your eye roll was classic. You're like, yeah. That was a classic moment. It makes me think of years ago, and I probably mentioned this in worship. I met this professor who got to go over to Russia, and this was back when the church was being horrifically persecuted. I mean, where Russia was truly trying to stamp out the church, go into churches and arrest people, and very, very actively trying to destroy the church. And he got to meet the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, kind of the Pope,
Wow.
if you will, of the Russian Orthodox Church. And he said, he was just like, are you scared? I mean, like, how are you dealing with all this? Every day you don't know what's going to happen. And he just very calmly said, governments will come and go. The Church of Jesus Christ will stand forever.
Right.
That was it. It was like a hard time, but at the end of the day, this Russian government will disappear eventually, and the church will still be here, And he was just, I was like, okay, you're right. but like, wow, to be able to hold that presence and hold that peace for himself and the people around him, truly beautiful,
I was reading in the book, and that struck me. God is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, and God is good. So therefore, the beginning is good and the ending is good.
That's beautiful. Other things we need to pray about. I'm just joyous right now. Tonight we begin our journey. We're headed to Fort Worth. We're not driving all the way tonight. We're breaking it up. My daughter's girlfriend, my son's girlfriend. I got too many people in my head. My son's girlfriend, she's a med student, and tomorrow is her matching ceremony where they tell her residency's going to be. And yeah, so it's a big day, and I'm really honored. She really wanted us there, and we have become, we've really become kind of surrogate parents to her, in a big way. She's voiced several times to my son and then to us how much we matter to her as mentors and as family. And so I'm really honored that we're going tomorrow. joyous that she's made it this far, and they've told her she's got a match. So there's things she doesn't have to do because she knows she has a match. And it's just a cool, neat time to be a part of.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it really
Yeah.
is. So I'm grateful. I'm anxious in a good way to find out where she's going to be, because that also determines where my son's going to be. Not immediately, but he'll follow her there. So, yeah. So it's it's going to be a rich weekend.
She doesn't have a guess.
She doesn't have a guess. She's got kind of a range in that.
Yes.
They put in. She was able to list her top 5 preferences. She had children's at Little Rock. There's only one residency in Arkansas, and
Wow.
she's heard is they tend to hire people they already know. So she listed that as her highest choice because of geography. She really does not expect to get that. I mean, if she gets that, we'll all sing hallelujah and do backflips, but she also listed, and I'm not sure in what order, Kansas City is real high on their list, which that wouldn't be bad. That's not too far away. St. Louis, while it's a little bit further, that's where I'm from, and my nephew's still there, my sister's there, and I'd love going up there. I look for an excuse to go up there. Nashville, Vanderbilt in Nashville. And there's one I can't remember. Those were likely going to be one of those. So we'll see. I think we're all kind of hoping it's Kansas City. She wants to be close to us, and she liked that program. He went up with her and they visited. He also went to Nashville. They did not go to St. Louis. He went with her on a few trips when they were courting them as residency programs, and have them come in and show them their programs and check them out. So we'll see.
Well, you let us know next week.
Yeah, I can do that. I may be
We'll be
so
asking.
excited it goes. Yeah, I may be so excited it goes in the email.
We
It is
want to know.
I'm going to send it. My plan is to send out a reminder the day before and then something day of. I'm trying to look. It looks like Zoom is creating a unique link for every meeting. And when I did this before, somehow I set it up where it had the same link every week.
Yeah, I think that was the difference today. It was different.
Yeah, and I cannot find where or how I did that, because I did it the same way. I actually replicated, like it can ask you, is this meeting going to repeat? And then you say like weekly, daily, monthly, or whatever. And I set it up the way I set up the one before, but it looks like it has generated a different code for each.
Well, maybe they've changed it. You know how that happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe you're not able to do that anymore.
It may not be operator error this time.
It may be a security thing.
But
I think
I'm telling you that just mainly so that I want to make sure I send you a couple emails to hopefully ensure you are grabbing the correct link. I'm afraid that if you grab an email from a week prior, you're going to be sitting in a room with a spinning wheel waiting for the meeting to start, So I'll try to send those out twice.
That's what I thought last week.
Yeah. Does everybody have, Sherry and Jerry, do you guys have my number if you would need to text me?
We do not, but
Let me give you that number. And then
Wait a
once I
minute.
give it to you, if you could send me one of your numbers in case we run into something where, like, I might run into an issue where I'm having trouble opening the call or something. I've got her number. My number is 903 908 5489.
9489
5489.
5489. Okay, got it.
903 908 5489. And if you'll text
903 908 5489.
that is correct. And
Okay,
yeah, just drop me a text and throw your name in it so I know who it is. And that way, if, you know, like tonight, I made it, but there's every possibility. If I'd run into an accident or something, I wouldn't have been able to get a hold of you all, and, you know, we wouldn't have gotten the call, and
Thank you.
yeah. And you never know, who knows what'll happen, and feel free to call me if you need something, you know, like if you have a pastoral thing pop up, you can always call me.
Thank you.
Oh, no worries. Any other things before we pray? And I'll pause in case somebody has something that as we're praying, they go, oh.
It's good to see everybody. Susan and Sherry and Jerry.
Thank you. Nice to see all of you too.
Yeah.
I enjoy this time. This
And
is
John.
good. Give thanks for this. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and move into prayer.